We have been hearing this for decades. This is the most important election of our lifetime. Well, guess what? This time around, it is. Hi, everybody. Brian Sussman here. Thanks for joining me. Brian Sussman Show podcast, episode 261. I'm going to be sharing with you information that perhaps you have not heard before regarding Kamala Harris. I'm going to try to be as reasonable as possible. I think overall I'm generally a pretty reasonable guy because, of course, the left wants you to believe that any MAGA person is off their rocker. They're nuts. They're unreasonable. They're stupid. They want to destroy democracy. So listen, I'm total MAGA. Make America great again. The left will tell you that has to do with racism and xenophobia and sexism. Make America great again. You know, I've got a lot of friends all over the world, and they're watching this election, and they believe as America goes, so goes the world and of course, their country. We have been a blessing to the world. The United States of America, we've lifted the entire global economy. We have been able to spread our charity throughout the world. And I'm talking about charity from individuals, not from governments. Individuals who have prospered here and have been able to spend their money in other countries to feed the poor and also get out the good news that Jesus Christ is Lord, because that kind of news, that can be a game changer for people. It changes lives. It turns around entire communities. We have been a blessing to the nations. And I got news for you. Under Kamala Harris, it's going to change big time. And I'll share with you some of that in just a moment. So I've been watching Kamala for some time, ever since she ran for DA in San Francisco in 2003. And that was not without controversy. Most people don't realize when she ran for DA, she was running against the guy who hired her. The incumbent DA, Terrence Hallinan, hired Kamala Harris. And Kamala actually had the, can we say cojones when it involves a woman? She had the moxie, the brashness, the arrogance, if you will, to actually run against her boss. And she won. She won the race because she cheated. You're wondering how she cheated. In San Francisco, they have a rule that when you're running for various offices, you can only spend so much money for your campaign. So in the case of that particular race in 2003, the spending limit for the campaign was $211,000. As it turned out, after she won, it was realized she spent almost $600,000. She got basically a slap on the wrist. It was a very serious offense, but in San Francisco, again, because, you know, she was special, she got a slap on the wrist and a $34,000 fine. But she won the race as DA. And right away, as DA, her tenure was marked with controversy. She put together this cockamamie program. I think it was called the Safe Streets program or something like that. She put together this cockamamie program whereby if you were an offender, you could actually just go ahead and go into a educational program, because the thought was, and she believes this to this day, education is everything. So if we can just educate you, you'll be able to get on your feet and go away from the life of crime that you've found yourself in all these years. In one particular case, there was an illegal alien, and she's always loved the illegal aliens. There was an illegal alien who had committed several violent crimes, and instead of going to prison, found himself in this particular program that she put together. He graduated from the program. His criminal record was completely expunged. And then what did he do? he ended up assaulting a woman and smashing her skull. That's Kamala Harris's first program. But then she never saw a murderer that she didn't think should have the death penalty. She was committed to being against the death penalty. And this happened a couple of times during her time as DA in San Francisco. And I remember one of them very, very well. And I've talked about this in a past podcast. It involved an illegal from El Salvador who was an MS-13 gang member. He had been a juvenile offender, but because San Francisco was a sanctuary city, he was never deported. So he was able to stay in San Francisco as a repeat juvenile offender for violent crimes. Now he becomes an adult. He's a big shot MS-13 gang member, gang leader. And in cold blood, and it's still not determined why to this day, he said it was a case of mistaken identity. He stopped a car in the street and blew the brains out of a dad and two of the sons. There was a third son watching. And despite this incredibly violent crime, she refused to impose the death sentence. And when I received a phone call from that grieving, out-of-her-mind widow who just lost a husband and two sons, outraged that Kamala Harris would not enforce the death penalty, I'll never forget that. It was chilling. She did the same thing with a cop killer. The guy had a troubled youth. Now he's an adult. Kills a cop. Wounds another cop. Did not get the death penalty. Why? Well, I contend it's because he was black. Never mind that one of the officers was Latino. He was black. He did not get the death penalty. It's called equity. And Kamala Harris is all about the equity. You know, it's interesting. If you go to briansussman.com, I've got a piece up. It's the speech you never want to hear. It's Kamala Harris's victory speech from 2016 when she became a U.S. Senator. Donald Trump likes to say that Kamala Harris is, I think his line is, she's dumb as hell. I don't think she's dumb as hell. I think she's lazy, but I don't think she's dumb. She's probably actually pretty average. But the bottom line is this. She's known for these stupid sounding word salads, right? Could it be possible that these word salads occur because she does not want you to know the content of her heart and the content of her character? So she goes into this flowery, mysterious gobbledygook that never really answers the question. Is it possible that that's what's happening? Because I say this, again, go to briansussman.com. It's entitled The Speech You Never Want to Hear. And it has a link to her victory speech from 2016 when she was elected U.S. Senator. It's an 8-minute speech. It's a combination of teleprompter and ad-lib. And it's a powerful speech. And it's frightening. In the course of 8 minutes, 16 seconds, she uses the word fight 33 times. And when she says fight, I mean the veins are popping out of her neck. This is a woman who wants to fight for a number of things, fighting for reproductive rights, quote unquote, fighting for climate justice, fighting against science deniers, basically fighting against us, MAGA. And she uses this word fight in a very violent way. And it was very clear from watching the speech, the Senate was a stepping stone for her. She had higher aspirations, and that did not include VP. It included, I believe, when you watch the speech, she wanted to be president. You know, I've talked about this in a past podcast, but the truth of the matter is I have a friend who used to be her boss when she was a deputy attorney in Alameda County, which is the county right across from San Francisco, just across the Bay Bridge. It's where Oakland is. She was a deputy attorney there. And he said she was just average, but she had aspirations. And her affair with Willie Brown helped open up doors to bigger things like becoming DA, becoming Attorney General, then becoming Senator, and now possibly becoming President of the United States of America. And I'm telling you something, when you listen to that speech, you will just pray to God that that is not the speech we hear on election night this year. It's chilling. But all that said, can I tell you a few things about Kamala Harris? Because when you look at her actual record as senator, it's pathetic. This comes from an organization called GovTrack. So it's an independent organization that just tracks the workings of the U.S. Congress. How they vote compared to their peers, what kind of bills they bring forward, etc. When you look at Kamala's record as senator, and again, she was just a senator for a short period of time because she's elected in 2016, and all of a sudden 2 years later she's Veep. But in terms of being liberal, she was the most liberal, by the way she voted, she was the most liberal person in the entire United States Congress, more liberal than crazy Bernie Sanders. When it comes to how strident she is, she had the worst record when it came to bipartisan legislation. In other words, if there was a bill that was brought up by a Republican, and now there was an opportunity to vote on it, she would never vote for a Republican bill. Many of her Democrat colleagues did. Some of these bills are just sort of, whatever, a waste of taxpayer money or a waste of time or a waste of paper. She would never vote with the Republicans. She was ranked the most politically left of all Senate Democrats. She wrote the fewest laws. This is where she's lazy. The fewest laws compared to other Democrats. In terms of her ability to gather co-sponsors, she would go out there for certain bills that she liked, and she would get co-sponsors. She could work the turf incredibly well. That's one thing she's very good at. She's able to organize. There's something about her personality that a lot of these lefties really, really like. When it comes to being absent, she missed 55.1% of the votes her last year as senator. 55% of the time this is their whole job. Look at legislation, decide if you like it or don't like it, and vote. 55% of the time, she was never even there for a vote. What was she doing all this time? It's just like when she was VP. What was she doing? Well, I think she was just basically working the turf, shaking hands, getting people to know her. I think that's what she was doing in Washington, D.C. as a senator, just making as many friends as she possibly could, and that's what she was doing as a VP. Now, let me tell you about the worst piece of legislation that was brought forward in Kamala's last year as senator. This was probably the worst bill to be put forward in the history of the entire United States Senate. When it was put forward, it only received one vote from another colleague in the Senate. It was entitled the Climate Equity Act of 2020. Now, for those of you who are listening to this podcast, I'm actually reading from my desktop. For those of you who are watching, my eyes are going to dart away from the camera, and I'm going to be viewing my screen. The Climate Equity Act of 2020. Now listen to this. The people of the United States have a right to live in a clean, healthful, and sustainable environment and climate with access to clean air and clean water. Okay, well, that all sounds really, really good. But the whole idea of this bill is to make, quote unquote, investments in frontline communities. Frontline communities are noted as being poor communities, minority communities, and inner city communities. These investments would be federal dollars, and I'm sure it would be in the billions, federal dollars that would be given to various nonprofit organizations that could then be distributed to these frontline communities in the name of climate equity. Remember, when you hear that word equity, when the left uses the word equity, what it means is getting even. This bill, which again was too far to the left, even for the left, only got one other vote. This bill would have been a huge financial giveaway to level the playing field for folks in these communities, whereby they could get big checks a couple of times a year to raise their standard of living without having to lift a finger. So this is the kind of stuff that's in Kamala's mind. This is why I'm very, very sure this woman, the apple didn't fall far from the tree when it comes to her parents. You know, they met in Berkeley, California, at the University of California in the 60s during the height of the hippie counterculture movement. They were civil rights activists. And in that 8-minute speech, that Senate speech, Kamala talks about her parents and how they met at UC Berkeley. And isn't it interesting that one of the things Kamala says she was going to fight for in this 8-minute speech, she said, I'm going to fight for Black Lives Matters. Well, her parents were a part of an organization that was very similar to Black Lives Matters while they were at Berkeley. And they were both incredibly liberal people. Her dad ended up becoming a professor emeritus at Stanford in post-Keynesian economics. This is basically Marxist economics. So the apple didn't fall far from the tree with this woman. She was raised with this sense that the United States is an evil place. We need to cut ties with the past and move on to the future. In fact, there's a line here, and I just want to close with this because this is super important. It's from that article that's up at my website. She has said this slogan many times. She said it as Attorney General. She said it as Senator. She said it as VP in a few speeches. She has said, we need to see what could be unburdened by what has been, unburdened by what has been. She says that it's a slogan her mother used to employ. I'm going to say it again. It's a mysterious slogan, but I think I know what it means. To see what could be unburdened by what has been. I believe a lot of people have dug into this trying to come up with a meaning, but I believe that this is a catchphrase inspired by Karl Marx. In the Communist Manifesto, and for those of you who read my books, you know, I have studied Karl Marx because I talk about it in all my books. In his 1948 Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx wrote this: in bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. So we would be, you know, bourgeois society, MAGA. So with MAGA, you know, Make America Great Again, the past dominates the present. So Karl Marx is speaking right to us as MAGA people. Oh, you dumbass MAGA people, the past dominates your present. But then he goes on to say, in communist society, the present dominates the past. And that's what I think Kamala means when she says to see what could be unburdened by what has been. This woman is a radical. If she becomes president of the United States, I know that to pass laws, you need to have Congress. But there is such a thing as executive action, and she can do a lot with that. And I fear one of the things she would do as president of the United States, because she is so radical and so strident and wants to fight, I believe she'll weaponize the federal government to go after her enemies. Anybody who's been vocal, anybody who's spoken out. I mean, we saw this with January 6th. All the people who are still in jail, never even had a trial. You look at like guys like Steve Bannon behind bars for what? For not showing up to a congressional meeting? You go right on down the line. All the people who have been, I've seen this for years, all the people who have been attacked by that organization within the federal government that wants us to pay from our pocketbooks every year. Yeah, that organization. The government will be weaponized. That's my biggest fear. So my biggest prayer is that this woman does not become president of the United States. And friends, we need to get the vote out. And we need to urge our friends to get out there and vote. And we need to pray that this is a just and fair election, because there's institutionalized cheating that has been allowed in so many states. You know, that's why they say, well, there was no cheating. There was no election fraud. It's because they've rigged the laws and the regulations to make it easier to cheat. I mean, my gosh, in the state of California alone, despite what the Constitution says, in the state of California alone, it's illegal for an election official to ask someone for their ID to prove that they're a citizen when they vote. So yeah, we've got some big problems in this country, but she cannot win. She cannot win. And if Donald Trump does win, and I pray he does, we need to work hard to make this country great again. Thanks for taking some time to be with me. Really appreciate you. God bless the United States of America, and God bless you. Thanks for listening.